Hey folks, welcome back to Cran Box Weekly. I am Carl, your host, and I'm here again with Vanessa. This week we're going to continue our talk about voting rights. Specifically, what we're going to focus on is the amendments that impact voting rights, the 15th, 19th, 24th, 26th Amendments, as well as the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. The reason we're doing this is because of the fact that, well, one, Vanessa had a lot of questions when it came to
I did.
when it came to this stuff and how voting rights evolved. But also more to the point is that these things are the key features of the voting of how we vote, right?
Right.
So we kind of talked about the system last week, but this is kind of talking about how we vote and why we vote the way that we vote, and kind of gives us the why, the historical narrative. So I guess we should just jump right into it. So let's get started.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why the age 18?
Because of the draft.
Okay, so.
Yeah, so it's essentially what happened is that in 1971 there was the draft going on for the Vietnam War, and there was an argument being made about how a kid could be drafted and go to war and fight and die for their country, but they weren't old enough to vote for the same government that was sending them to war, right? So essentially, what it came down to is the politicians recognized that it was not fair to give them a secondary citizenship, as it were, make them not full citizens, but still require them to go fight for their country. So they changed the rules in the 70s in order to allow for those same people that were going to war to be able to vote.
Okay. What was the age before that? Do you know? Was there a certain age or was it just.
It depended on the state.
Okay.
I mean, there are some states where they had the voting age of 18. Some states it was 21, but it was kind of all over the place. I mean, you look at women's suffrage, right? And there was a state in New Jersey. Everything's legal in New Jersey. But New Jersey had voting rights for women and non-landowners and black people for about 11 years.
Right, and then they changed it.
Right. At the very beginning of our country, they had it. And then all of a sudden they went, nope, we're not going to do this anymore.
We take it back.
Just
kidding.
I'm not sure how that happened. So, yeah, again, that goes back to our conversation about how the states have purview over the time, place, and manner by which the elections are held. Whereas Congress has the authority to put restrictions or like limitations. They have to do that through passing bills, right? The federal government can't just come down and be like, this is the new law.
Right.
Right. So again, that ties back to what's going on right now with the executive orders where this is the new law. You can't do that. But long story short, the reason that they went that way is because they wanted to make sure that 18-year-olds could vote and go fight for their country.
Okay. So on that as well, so with 18, so 18 now you can vote, you can join your country, you can die for your country, all that, but you can't smoke and you can't drink until the age of 21. So do you foresee that that's going to change for those that join the military?
It would not surprise me if this administration undoes the procedural rules that have been put in place by Congress as far as the age limit for drinking and smoking. But what I will say is that those laws were put in place because of recommendations from like people who are experts in the field of medicine, right? So like what they've determined is that the human brain doesn't start or finish fully developing until 21, 22, right? And there are negative impacts that marijuana, tobacco, and alcohol have on the development of the brain. So if we allow people to start drinking early in their development phase, they're going to wind up with non or limited developmental capability when it comes to their brain. So they'll stay like kids for the rest of their lives, so to speak. I don't know if that's completely valid because people in Europe drink.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's just something that we have here. I think it's just a way for them to regulate what people do here, honestly, and tax it.
It's probably a leftover from Prohibition.
That's what I was going to say,
Yeah.
prohibition. Yeah. So with that, what I was reading, with you were saying about New Jersey and that they had allowed everybody and then all of a sudden they revoked it. And then the 15th Amendment came to where you could have African Americans were given the right to vote. But there was still, from what I was reading, there was still states that were instituting things to kind of like undermine what the federal government had put out there. So they were like, you were saying last episode about the literacy tests and stuff to prohibit them from. So was there another amendment that came in after the 15th that helped with the discrimination?
Yeah, so the 24th Amendment, it was passed it was ratified in 1964. And essentially what it did is it said that polling taxes that had been used to keep people from voting, literacy tests that had been used to keep people from voting, all of those things were now illegal and unconstitutional because it was an amendment to the Constitution, right?
Okay.
And so this wasn't necessarily Congress coming down and saying, thou will, right? It was Congress coming down and creating an amendment, which then got ratified by the states, that said the Constitution says this, you will not disobey this, right? Which is far different than like creating a law that has regulations and all that good stuff, because that can be challenged. Now, if someone tries to put polling taxes in place in, say, New Jersey, because everything's legal in New Jersey. Sorry, Hamilton is like my favorite movie, and like anyways,
The movie, it's a musical. It's not a movie.
okay, you're right.
I know.
I haven't been to see the actual.
Can we just say that again? I'm right.
Oh God, here we go. I'm never gonna live that one down.
Nope.
No,
It's
ever.
recorded too.
Yeah. But say New Jersey came out tomorrow and said we're going to put a polling tax into place, right? And that's considered a targeted barrier because they're targeting people who can't afford to go, which is also where the argument about the voter ID thing comes into play. Right? We talked about that last week, but that's also considered a form of a targeted barrier to access, right? Which is why people say that voter ID laws are against the Constitution, because it does fly in the face of the 24th.
Gotcha.
Technically. Right. And you can make that leap in the judgment call there. But long story short, I forgot what we were talking about.
The 24th Amendment.
Oh, yeah. So long story short, the 24th Amendment came down and said you can't do this. So now when New Jersey does do something like that, what happens is you can take that to court, and the Supreme Court would be like, well, the Constitution says this. Therefore, even though the state's purview is this, you will do this.
Okay, so does federal law trump state law?
The Constitution trumps state law.
Okay.
Right? So the Constitution establishes the rules and procedures for how things are done.
Okay.
Right? So essentially what it does is it says, hey, check it out. Like these are the things that apply. Right? Now, if you look at it from the perspective of how does that then go down to the states? Well, it was brought up in a U.S. Supreme Court case of Harper versus the Virginia Board of Elections. And in that decision, the Supreme Court ruled that the 24th Amendment applied to the states and the way that the states run their election.
Gotcha.
So because the Supreme Court made that rule, now we have the precedent that says states must follow constitutional law.
That makes sense. Hey, at least keep them in check.
Right.
Yeah. So then I know we talked about the 26th was the age one as well. And the 19th came around, and that's when women were allowed to vote as well. Was there any barriers with that for women voting, or was that still just the states were in general?
Well, the reason that the 19th Amendment came around is because there was such a movement to get women's suffrage. And a lot of the states had already opened the door to women's suffrage. But essentially what happened is that the people who advocated for the 19th, they lobbied for it because they knew that if they didn't, those rights could be taken away. Right? New Jersey.
Yeah.
Right? So at the end of the day, when they got their ability to vote, I mean, they faced a lot of problems in the home, right? Like back then, the women weren't allowed. I mean, it wasn't considered one of those things where you're seen, not heard, right? That's the way that it worked back then. and the man voted, the man had to say, the man did these things. So there was that fight to get them to be able to be actually get to the voting booths, right? In the South, you still had Jim Crow era stuff, right? So even black women faced the taxes and the literacy tests, which is why that 24th Amendment came back around.
Gotcha. So what I find interesting is that, the African Americans, that was back in, what was it, 1870, that one. And then the women's was 1920. So they had all their rights to vote and everything way before the Native Americans did. So I find it very fascinating that their name is Native Americans. Like, they were here first, and America came in and then established that, hey, you stay on your sovereign land, and that's your property, not technically a U.S.
Right. So, and they got their ability to vote in 1924. So 4 years after women's suffrage, Native Americans got their ability to vote. And the reason for that is because up until that time, Native Americans weren't considered citizens. Right? They were considered members of their own tribal nations, right? So the reserves that we put them on, right? We can go back and forth all day long about whether or not we did the right thing during Manifest Destiny and yada yada yada, right? Original sin. But long story short, we put them on these reservations and we still designated them as foreign countries. Right, so we identified them as not citizens. They were their own country. They were their own nation, right? Which is why when you go for Native American is one of those ethnicities. There was a time where it was a nationality, right? And you would say I'm part of the Shawnees or the Cherokee or the Powhatans or something to that effect, right? The Tuscaroraans who were here,
and now they just lump them all as indigenous Americans,
right? But the reality is that we didn't see them as, and I'm saying we as
right,
didn't see them as citizens, therefore they didn't have the right to vote. When the Indian Citizenship Act was passed, it was determined that all Native Americans were citizens of the United States, therefore they got their right to vote.
Gotcha.
So it was probably partly out of malice because racism and all that good stuff,
right.
But it was also because of the way that they were deemed present or residents of the country, but not citizens of the country.
Right.
Second-class citizen.
It fascinates me at the fact that it was their country before we came in, and then we just pushed them out and we said, "Oh, you're foreign to this country." No, they were native. It fascinates me that we just came in and did that. I think it's crappy on America's part, but I also understand nations all over the world do it. Totally understand it. I don't like it, but
yeah, and I mean that's one of those topics that we can definitely. I mean, we can dig into that one, right?
Right.
I agree with you. What we did was wrong. The Trail of Tears was terrible, but at the end of the day, it is what it is, and we have to acknowledge that history led us to this point, right? Which is why we talk about the 15th, 19th, 24th, and 26th Amendments, as well as the Voting Rights Act and the Indian Citizenship Act, right? We got to know about these things because this is what gets us. I'm going to professor mode. This is what gets us to understanding the why behind what we do.
right.
Right. So
what is the Voting Registration Act?
So the Voting Rights Act.
Oh, rights, not registration.
Yeah. So the Voting Rights Act is an act that was passed by Congress, not an amendment. It's a law, right? And essentially what it did is it created rules and regulations that allowed for an increase in voter turnout for African Americans, right? Mm-hmm. So if you remember, I think it was 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago, the Supreme Court made a ruling that got rid of a portion of the Voting Rights Act, which is that the federal government could oversee or was required to oversee and approve any changes to voting laws in the southern states, right?
Why just the southern?
Well, because the Voting Rights Act was designed to ensure that African Americans had the ability to vote. It was a way of enshrining our right to vote. In the South, because of Jim Crow laws,
So were they not? Wait. So did they not focus on the North? Like, did they not? Did African Americans not live in the North? Like,
so the thing is that the laws that were getting passed that were anti-African American as far as voting goes and voting access goes were in the South,
okay,
right? And
for
so
the discrimination that they were
right,
doing. Okay.
right. So it was primarily because of that. Now, it's not saying that the states in the North were not okay, but it was one of the ways for the federal government to make sure that African Americans could get to the polling place, because there was a time where African Americans couldn't get to the polling place
Gotcha.
because they were surrounded by KKK.
Right. I did read about that. That's scary.
So it was a form of intimidation. And so part of what the Voting Rights Act did is they said, okay, buffer zone. You can't campaign. You can't put anyone around the voting place. Like, you have to stay X number of feet away to allow freedom of movement in and out. And you can't test them. You can't do any of these things. And essentially what it does is it makes it so that made it so that African Americans could do it. And the African American turnout actually rose as a result of the VRA.
Gotcha.
After Section 5 was overturned by the Supreme Court, the only thing that we had left, or the only thing that was left in the toolkit that was the VRA or is the VRA, is the after the fact, right? Like, there's a legal term, I don't remember, post facto or something to that effect. But essentially what it says is, if there is an infringement on an individual's voting rights, or there's an infringement upon a group of people's voting rights, right? Or a law is considered to be discriminatory in nature, it doesn't have to get approved by the federal government, but the federal government can come back in after the fact and challenge it.
So, but it's not an amendment to the Constitution.
No, it's a law. It's not an amendment.
Okay. So, but you had said earlier that the states don't have to follow necessarily, like, the state law would trump federal law. So, is that the same with the Voting Rights Act?
So, yes and no, right? So, because the Supreme Court ruled that the VRA applies to the states, right? Then the court also ruled that Congress, and in the Constitution, it gives Congress the authority to set limitations, restrictions, and requirements on voting, right? So, like, for example, if you're going to go vote, you have to be a citizen of the United States.
Right.
For federal elections,
Right.
right?
Wait, so you don't have to be a citizen to vote nationally or locally?
It depends on the location that
state.
you're in, right? So in California, to vote in state elections, you have to be a citizen and a permanent resident of the state of California, right? To vote in some municipal elections in California, there are no requirements for you to be a citizen of the United States. You just have to prove that you were a resident of that city, which is fair, right? Like, if you think about it, if I'm living, like, for example, I'm military. I came from California to North Carolina, right? I can do vote by mail to California, right? That's easy. But what if I'm living here permanently and I want to have an impact on where I live,
Right.
right? I want to be able to vote here. So that's a fair move. Like, I can demonstrate that I'm a legal citizen, right?
Right.
By showing my ID, but I can also demonstrate that I live here, right?
So you
And
can vote for
right.
local here and federal there
Well, you would vote local and federal
at the same state.
here in the state, right?
Okay.
Yeah, you can't vote in two different states.
Oh. Okay.
That's voter fraud.
Oh.
Yeah. You can only vote once, and you can only vote in the state that you're registered in.
Well, okay, so I could only vote in North Carolina. Like, if I was, because I'm from Ohio, if I was still a resident of Ohio, I would still, so I couldn't vote for federally from Ohio and state locally from here. Okay. No, that makes sense. Makes sense. Good. Well, good to know. I did not know that. So, I think that was good. What else is there? What else should we talk about? Oh, the VRA, right?
Yeah.
So the Voters' Rights Act, that's where the mail-in ballots came into play, correct? I wrote it down right here.
I don't remember if that's...
That's okay. We'll move on.
Yeah, I don't remember. But here's what the VRA also did, right? So the VRA, remember how we talked about last week how like the Australian system was approved because in the South they liked it because it was basically a de facto literacy test, right?
Right.
You went in, you couldn't read the ballot, you can't vote. What the VRA did is they allowed for multilingual and bilingual folks or people who needed assistance. It allowed them to take someone in with them.
Oh, gotcha. So they
Right.
can actually
Yep.
be able to vote even if they don't read the language that's on the
Right.
paper. Okay.
So that's the good thing that came out of the VRA, right? And we already said that Section 5, right? I said a section, but it was Section 5 of the VRA that got overturned by the Supreme Court, which is that federal review process for any changes to voting laws. And interestingly enough, as soon as that got overturned, we started seeing a rise in voter ID laws. Which again tells you like these are the things that they may not seem like they're racist or discriminatory in nature in one perspective,
Right.
but when you tie it into the whole broad picture, it starts to seem like it's suspicious as far as, you know, hey, you waited until we weren't stopping you.
Right.
Right?
Right.
You knew it was wrong.
Right.
It's like the kid who gets caught with his hand in the cookie jar,
Right.
right? Like,
Smack his hand.
but I guess what I can say is that last month we talked about protest rights. And last month we talked about how like the Supreme Court has been like a bastion of our rights when it comes to the First Amendment. Well, the reality is that the court systems have nothing to do with our electoral our electoral process,
Right.
right? But the ones that are the bastion of our rights there is Congress,
Okay.
right? Because Congress sets the precedent. Another bastion are the states, right? Because the states run the process.
Okay.
So each state has its own way of doing it. And I like to say that that's what makes our voting system the most secure that any other country can have, because other countries, it's run by the federal government, right?
Right.
And so everything kind of gets funneled through there. But each state has its own different process of doing things. So to be able to say, hey, we're gonna alter the votes here and we're gonna alter the votes there, you're gonna have to like get in
Deep.
to each system,
Right.
right? And it's really hard to do. Now we've seen a lot of the elections boards get overturned or get replaced by biased election boards. We've seen even in the state of North Carolina, we've seen how the Republican legislature has taken away the responsibility for managing the voting process from the governor and given it directly to an individual who is sitting in that position, but is a Republican.
Right.
Right. So we've seen these things happen over and over and over again, but you're not going to see it happen. We haven't seen it happen at such a large scale that it's going to cause a problem. Right.
Right. Right.
Is there voter fraud occurring?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is it at the scale that?
It's going to make a difference. I don't think
No,
so.
no, not at all.
Which brings me to another random weird fact that I found out that, back in the day when, like say Trump and Harris, when they were running for president, back in the day, it was, you would have those two candidates and whoever won became president and the loser became vice president. Why did we go away from that?
Jeffrey Jefferson.
Okay.
So Thomas Jefferson didn't really like his vice president, right? It had a lot to do with the fact that Burr ran against Jefferson, and then all of a sudden now he's right. But in addition to that, as vice president, Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel, shot him,
Yeah, he did.
ran from the law,
Yeah.
hid from the law, journeyed to the Louisiana territory, tried to incite an insurrection in order to carve a piece of land for himself that he could be king over.
Oh, interesting.
Right. And so, like, they didn't get along very well. It was just, but long story short is that kind of started that process.
Gotcha.
And what happened is that as the party system started taking hold and the party system started to become more implanted in the way that we do business and the way that we run our elections and the way that we run our entire government political system, right? what happened is that they started this push where it's no longer the second person who gets right. We have this illusion of voting for the president.
Yeah, we don't vote for them.
We have this illusion of voting for the president during the primaries, right? And I would be the first one to be like, hey, the primaries are your most important vote. Because that's how you decide who's going to the general. Mm-hmm. But as we saw with the Democratic convention, it's not how it works.
No.
You send your delegates, and your delegates are supposed to vote based off of how their state voted, but they don't have to.
Wait, why?
Because your delegates are just delegates. And what happens is if they can't get to the majority vote that they need, mm-hmm. right, at the convention, what will happen is that the candidates will wheel and deal with their delegates
until they get to
the number that they need to win.
Wow.
So like when the field was full of Republican delegates, right? Remember how we had what's her name? I forgot her name. Former governor of South Carolina.
Oh yeah, like I know that.
Yeah, I can't. Nikki Haley, that's the one.
Oh, okay.
Right? So we had Nikki Haley, right? And Nikki Haley was running for election against Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. Chris Christie was running for election against Donald Trump. And Ted Cruz. I mean, the whole slew. They didn't pull out before the primary started. And because they didn't pull out before the primary started, people were voting for them. Mm. And in some instances, they got some of the delegates. And so when they went to the Republican National Committee or convention, what happened is they told their delegates to vote for so-and-so instead of voting for them. That's how it works, right? Like it's completely, we don't actually vote for our people.
Huh.
We vote for the people who vote for the people.
Well, I don't like that. I mean, I get it to a certain extent, but at the same time, like when they first came out with it, because, we didn't have planes. We mm-hmm. didn't have, it was a long trek to go from here to California, but we do now. So why do we still have this outdated system that they represent us, and in the grand scheme of things, they're not really representing us?
So that's a good question, but I'm going to hold it until next week. So with that being said, that's all we have this week. Next week, we will be talking about the Electoral College as well as the conventions and how that whole process works and what it means for us as voters. So make sure that you tune in next week, and we'll talk about that then.